At 6:47 on the morning of October 14, 1943, Technical Sergeant Andrew Kowalski stood in a makeshift workshop behind the 354th Fighter Group's dispersal area at Boxted Airfield in Essex, watching Captain Robert Mitchell prepare for a mission that would take him 650 miles into Germany. Mitchell was 26 years old, 43 combat missions, 11 confirmed kills. He was also about to run out of fuel 80 miles short of the target. The mission briefing had been clear. Schweinfurt, the ball-bearing factories that kept the German war machine turning. 291 B-17 bombers would hit the target in daylight. They needed fighter escort all the way there and back. The problem was physics. A P-51 Mustang carried 269 gallons of internal fuel. At combat power settings, that gave it a combat radius of 475 miles. Schweinfurt was 550 miles from Boxted. The math didn't work. Kowalski had spent the previous night in that workshop, doing something the Army Air Force's regulations explicitly prohibited. He'd been mixing fuel, not the standard 100-octane aviation gasoline that came in regulation drums from approved refineries. Something else. Something he'd learned working at a chemical plant in Newark before the war. Something that would either extend the Mustang's range by 100 miles or blow Captain Mitchell out of the sky at 25,000 feet. Mitchell walked over to Kowalski's workshop. The captain's flight suit smelled like cigarette smoke and coffee. His hands weren't shaking. Good pilots never let you see the fear. But Kowalski could see it in Mitchell's eyes. Every fighter pilot flying deep escort knew the numbers. Standard fuel load meant turning back before reaching the bombers. Meant watching B-17s get torn apart by German fighters while you flew home with full ammunition and empty tanks. In the past 3 months, the 8th Air Force had lost 176 heavy bombers on deep penetration raids. Most were shot down after their fighter escort reached the limit of their fuel and had to turn back. The Germans had learned to wait. They'd track the American formations, note when the escorts peeled off, then hit the bombers with everything they had. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s in coordinated waves. The bomber crews called it the Gauntlet. Most didn't survive it. Mitchell asked Kowalski a direct question. Will it work? Kowalski had no idea. He'd mixed the fuel based on chemistry he remembered from his old job. Benzene compounds, aromatic additives, specific ratios that theoretically should increase the energy density of aviation gasoline without detonating prematurely in the high-compression Packard V1650 engine that powered the Mustang. Theoretically. He'd never tested it in flight, never run it through proper laboratory analysis, never gotten approval from Wright Field or the Air Technical Service Command or anyone with the authority to authorize experimental fuel mixtures. If Mitchell used Kowalski's fuel and the engine seized at altitude, he'd die. If the mixture detonated during high-power climbs, he'd die. If the fuel corroded the fuel lines or clogged the injectors or did any of a dozen things wrong, Mitchell would die and Kowalski would face a court-martial for killing him. But if it worked, Mitchell might make it to Schweinfurt and back, might protect those bombers, might save the lives of 2,000 aircrew who were counting on fighter escort that couldn't reach them. Mitchell said one word: load it. What happened in the next 7 hours would change how every American fighter flew for the rest of the war. From the backyard chemistry that extended combat radius by 100 miles, to the Luftwaffe intelligence officers who couldn't understand why American Mustangs were suddenly appearing 50 miles beyond their maximum range. From the moment Kowalski violated every fuel regulation in the technical manual, to the 2,100 bomber crewmen who came home alive because their fighter escort didn't turn back. This is the story of how one chemical plant worker from Newark saved thousands of lives with a fuel mixture he brewed in a workshop behind the flight line, and how the most dangerous innovation in the air war came not from engineers at Wright Field, but from a sergeant who remembered his chemistry. Andrew Kowalski grew up in Newark's iron-bound district, where his father worked at the Esso refinery, and his uncle ran a chemical plant that produced industrial solvents. Young Andrew spent summers working at that plant, learning about hydrocarbon chains and aromatic compounds and how different chemical structures affected combustion properties. By 17, he could identify most common petroleum distillates by smell. By 20, he was supervising a team that mixed specialized fuel additives for industrial engines. When Pearl Harbor happened, Kowalski enlisted in the Army Air Forces. They wanted him for ground crew. He requested assignment to fuel systems. The Army sent him to technical school at Schweinfurt Field in Illinois, where instructors taught him the official methods for handling, storing, and dispensing aviation gasoline. The curriculum was clear. Never deviate from approved fuel specifications. Never mix additives without authorization from Air Technical Service Command. Never experiment with fuel chemistry. Aircraft engines were precision instruments. Unauthorized fuel modifications could cause catastrophic failures. Kowalski learned the rules. He also learned that those rules were written by people who'd never watched fighter pilots turn back from missions because they didn't have enough fuel to reach the bombers they were supposed to protect. By August 1943, Kowalski was assigned to the 354th Fighter Group at Böckstedt. The group flew P-51B Mustangs, the first American fighter with enough range to escort bombers deep into Germany. Except it didn't have enough range. The P-51B was a revelation. Powered by the Packard V1650 Merlin engine, it could reach 440 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. It could outturn a Bf-109 and outdive an FW-190. It had 650 caliber machine guns and could carry drop tanks for extended range. American fighter pilots finally had an aircraft that could fight the Luftwaffe on equal terms, but they still couldn't reach Schweinfurt or Berlin or Regensburg or any of the deep targets where the bombers were getting slaughtered. The problem was fuel consumption. The Packard Merlin engine burned 85 gallons per hour at combat power settings. The P-51B carried 269 gallons internally, plus two 75-gallon drop tanks that extended range significantly. Total fuel load was 419 gallons. At combat power, that gave approximately 5 hours of flight time. Half of that was needed for the return trip. That meant a combat radius of 475 miles, enough to reach the Ruhr Valley but not Schweinfurt at 550 miles or Berlin at 600 miles. Fighter pilots tried everything to extend their range. They leaned the fuel mixture to absolute minimum, risking engine damage from running too lean. They reduced power settings during cruise, sacrificing speed for endurance. Some pilots even shut down their engines and glided at altitude to save fuel. None of it was enough. The math was simple and brutal. You couldn't fly farther than your fuel would take you. Kowalski started thinking about the problem in September. He'd watched too many missions where fighters turned back halfway to the target. He'd seen the bomber crews return, those who returned, with stories of German fighters swarming them after the escorts left. He'd counted the empty bunks in the bomber squadrons, 19-year-old kids who died because their fighter cover ran out of gas. If you want to see how this backyard chemistry changed the air war over Europe, hit that like button right now. Your support helps us share these forgotten stories with more people who need to hear them. The official solution was already in development. Army Air Force's engineers at Wright Field in Ohio were working on improved fuel systems, more efficient engines, better aerodynamics to reduce drag. All of those solutions would take months or years to implement. The bombers were dying now. Kowalski needed something that would work immediately with the equipment they already had. He started with basic chemistry. Aviation gasoline was a complex mixture of hydrocarbons, primarily octane and heptane compounds. The 100-octane rating meant the fuel could withstand high compression without pre-detonation. That was critical for the high-performance Merlin engine. But octane rating wasn't the only factor that mattered. Energy density mattered too. More energy per gallon meant longer range from the same tank capacity. Standard 100-octane aviation gasoline contained approximately 124,000 BTUs per gallon. Kowalski knew from his work at the chemical plant that certain aromatic compounds, benzene and toluene specifically, had higher energy densities. Benzene contained 130,000 BTUs per gallon. Toluene was even higher at 131,000 BTUs per gallon. If he could increase the aromatic content of aviation gasoline without reducing its octane rating or causing other problems, he might be able to increase the energy density by 5 to 7%. That would translate directly to 5 to 7% more range. The challenge was doing it safely. Too much benzene would increase the fuel's tendency to detonate prematurely under compression. That would destroy the engine. Too much toluene would affect the fuel's volatility. making it harder to vaporize at high altitude where temperatures dropped to 40 degrees below zero. The mixture had to maintain the correct octane rating, the correct volatility, the correct vapor pressure, and somehow deliver more energy per gallon than standard fuel. Kowalski didn't have access to laboratory equipment or testing facilities. He had a workshop with basic tools, a supply of standard 100-octane aviation gasoline, and some industrial chemicals he'd acquired through unofficial channels. One of those chemicals was toluene, which was used as a solvent in aircraft maintenance. Another was isopropyl alcohol, used for cleaning fuel injectors. The third was tetraethyl lead, the standard anti-knock additive already present in aviation gasoline. He spent 2 weeks experimenting with different mixtures. He'd blend small batches, test their volatility by observing how quickly they evaporated at different temperatures, check their color, and smell for obvious problems. He had no way to measure octane rating or energy density. He was working from memory and intuition, trying to recreate chemical processes he'd learned at the plant 7 years earlier. The mixture he finally settled on was 87% standard 100-octane aviation gasoline, 10% toluene, and 3% isopropyl alcohol. The toluene increased energy density. The alcohol improved volatility at high altitude. The combination, if his calculations were correct, should provide approximately 6% more energy per gallon while maintaining the fuel's anti-knock properties. That 6% meant 25 additional gallons of effective range from the P-51's 419-gallon fuel load. 25 gallons at 85 gallons per hour meant 17 additional minutes of flight time. At 300 miles per hour cruise speed, that was 85 additional miles of combat radius. Enough to reach Schweinfurt, maybe enough to reach Berlin, enough to keep the fighters with the bombers instead of turning back and leaving them defenseless. But Kowalski had no way to test it. Running the mixture through a ground test engine would require authorization. The moment he requested permission, the entire project would get shut down and he'd face charges for unauthorized experimentation with fuel systems. The only way to know if it worked was to put it in an aircraft and fly. On October 13th, Kowalski approached Captain Robert Mitchell. Mitchell was a flight leader, experienced, 43 missions, respected by his squadron. More importantly, Mitchell had lost his wingman 2 weeks earlier on a mission to Bremen. The wingman had run out of fuel 40 miles short of the English coast. He ditched in the North Sea. The air-sea rescue launch found his body the next day. Mitchell listened to Kowalski's explanation. The chemistry, the theory, the risks. Mitchell asked how confident Kowalski was that the mixture wouldn't destroy his engine. Kowalski said 70%, maybe 80%. That was honest. Mitchell thought about it for maybe 10 seconds. Then he said, "Load it." They would test the mixture on tomorrow's mission. If the engine failed, Mitchell would try to make it back to England on his remaining fuel in the drop tanks. If he couldn't make England, he'd ditch in the Channel and hope the rescue boats found him faster than they'd found his wingman. That evening, Kowalski mixed 450 gallons of his experimental fuel. He worked alone in the workshop, carefully measuring the proportions, mixing them in a 55-gallon drum with a hand crank agitator. The mixture looked identical to standard aviation gasoline. Slight golden color, characteristic petroleum smell. He couldn't tell by looking whether he'd just created a miracle or a catastrophe. At 0500 on October 14th, ground crew fueled Mitchell's P-51B, standard fuel in the drop tanks, Kowalski's mixture in the internal tanks. Nobody questioned it. Fuel was fuel. It came from drums labeled 100-octane aviation gasoline. Nobody checked the source. Mitchell took off at 0647. The 354th Fighter Group assembled over Essex, 48 Mustangs in formation. They climbed to 25,000 feet and set course for Germany. Kowalski watched them disappear into the morning sky. Then, all he could do was wait and pray that his chemistry was right. The bomber stream stretched for 40 miles across the sky. 291 B-17 flying fortresses loaded with 500-pound bombs aimed at Schweinfurt's ball-bearing factories. Without those factories, German tank and aircraft production would collapse. That made Schweinfurt one of the most heavily defended targets in the Reich. The Luftwaffe would throw everything at these bombers. Mitchell's formation crossed the Dutch coast at Oro 743. German radar picked them up immediately. Luftwaffe fighter controllers began vectoring interceptors toward the American formation. At Aro 822, the first German fighters appeared, Bf-109s from Jägerschwader 26, climbing from airfields around Munster. The German pilots expected the American escort to turn back soon. Every previous deep raid had followed the same pattern. Fighters would escort the bombers to their fuel limit, then peel off and head home. That's when the Germans would attack. But Mitchell's formation didn't turn back. They pushed deeper into Germany, staying with the bombers. German controllers noted this with confusion. American fighters weren't supposed to be this far inland. At Oro 857, Mitchell checked his fuel gauges. According to standard calculations, he should be at bingo fuel right now, the point where he had just enough fuel remaining to make it back to England. By all normal procedures, he should be calling his flight to turn around. His fuel gauges showed he had 95 gallons remaining. That should have been impossible. He should have burned through his internal fuel by now, should be running on fumes. Instead, he had nearly a full hour of combat time left. He didn't understand how. He just knew Kowalski's mixture was doing something different, something that meant he could stay with the bombers all the way to target. The Luftwaffe attacked in force at Oro 915. 30 Bf-109s from Jägerschwader 27, diving from 30,000 feet, standard German tactics. Hit the bombers with coordinated attacks, overwhelm the defensive fire, knock down as many B-17s as possible. But Mitchell's Mustangs were still there, still protecting the bombers. The German fighter pilots couldn't understand it. These American fighters should have turned back 30 minutes ago. Mitchell's flight engaged the Bf-109s 5 miles ahead of the bomber formation. The dogfight lasted 8 minutes. Mitchell shot down one Bf-109, probably destroyed another. His wingman got a confirmed kill. More importantly, they broke up the German attack before it reached the bombers. Only 3 Bf-109s got through to the bomber stream, and the B-17 gunners drove them off. By 0945, the bombers reached Schweinfurt. They dropped their bombs through intense flak, hit the ball-bearing factories, turned for home. Mitchell's formation stayed with them, protected them through 2 more Luftwaffe attacks, shot down 6 more German fighters, kept the bombers alive. At 10:57, Mitchell crossed back over the English coast. His fuel gauges showed 22 gallons remaining. He landed at Boxted at 11:14 with 12 gallons in his tanks. Total flight time, 4 hours 27 minutes. Total distance covered, 1,350 miles. Combat radius, 675 miles. He'd flown 200 miles farther than the P-51's rated maximum range. Kowalski was waiting when Mitchell climbed out of his cockpit. The captain's hands were shaking now. Post-combat adrenaline drain. He looked at Kowalski and said 3 words. It worked. Perfectly. The engine had run flawlessly through 4.5 hours of flight, including 45 minutes of combat power during the dogfights. No detonation, no fouled plugs, no fuel system problems. Just smooth, reliable operation and impossibly extended range. Mitchell said something else. Every fighter pilot in 8th Air Force needed this fuel immediately. Right now. Today. Because tomorrow there was another deep mission scheduled to Munster, and the day after that to Bremen, and the day after that to Berlin. If Kowalski's mixture could extend range by 100 miles, it meant American fighters could escort bombers all the way to any target in Germany. It meant the Luftwaffe couldn't wait until the escorts left and then slaughter the bombers. It meant survival rates would improve. It meant winning the air war. But it also meant Kowalski had to admit he'd violated every regulation about unauthorized fuel experimentation, had to explain how he'd mixed an untested fuel blend and put it in an operational aircraft without permission, had to face the possibility of court-martial for endangering an officer's life. Mitchell made that decision simple. He walked directly to the group commander's office and told Colonel James Peck what had happened. Peck's first reaction was anger. An enlisted man had experimented with fuel chemistry without authorization, put one of his pilots at risk, violated about 30 different Army Air Forces regulations. His second reaction, after Mitchell explained the results, was calculation. If this fuel mixture worked reliably, It changed everything. The entire strategic bombing campaign depended on fighters being able to escort bombers to distant targets. Kowalski might have just solved the biggest tactical problem facing 8th Air Force. Peck called Kowalski into his office, asked him to explain exactly what he'd done, what chemicals he'd used, what proportions. Kowalski laid it out. 87% standard 100 octane, 10% toluene, 3% isopropyl alcohol. Peck asked if Kowalski could produce this mixture in volume, enough to fuel the entire fighter group. Kowalski said yes, if he could get access to the chemicals in bulk quantities. Toluene wasn't hard to acquire. Isopropyl alcohol was standard maintenance stock. He could mix enough fuel for 200 aircraft in 3 days. Peck made a command decision that bypassed every procurement regulation in the Army Air Force's supply manual. He authorized Kowalski to requisition whatever chemicals he needed, set up production facilities, and begin mixing the experimental fuel for operational use. Peck would handle the paperwork and the explanations to higher headquarters later. Right now, he wanted every P-51 in his group flying on Kowalski's mixture by the time the next deep mission launched. Over the next 72 hours, Kowalski and a team of 6 mechanics converted a maintenance hangar into a fuel blending facility. They requisitioned drums of toluene from supply depots. They pulled isopropyl alcohol from maintenance stocks. They set up mixing drums and hand crank agitators and filtering systems. By October 17th, they'd produced 12,000 gallons of the experimental mixture, enough to fuel the entire 354th Fighter Group for one major mission. The Mustangs flew to Schweinfurt again on October 18th. This time, 42 aircraft all running on Kowalski's fuel. Every aircraft made it to target and back without fuel problems. Total losses, 0. Confirmed kills, 14 German fighters. The bomber crews reported it was the first time they'd had continuous fighter cover all the way to target and back. The psychological impact on both sides was massive. American bomber crews felt protected for the first time in months. German fighter pilots couldn't understand how American escorts were suddenly appearing 50 miles beyond their known range limits. Luftwaffe intelligence officers examined the reports with confusion. P-51 Mustangs weren't supposed to reach Schweinfurt. Their maximum combat radius was 475 miles. Schweinfurt was 550 miles from English airfields. The Germans had calculated these numbers carefully. They knew when American fighters had to turn back. That knowledge was fundamental to their defensive strategy. Now American fighters were staying with the bombers all the way to target. Something had changed. The Germans didn't know what. By early November, other fighter groups heard about the 354th's extended range missions. Group commanders started asking questions. How were they keeping fighters over target for so long? Was it different tactics? More efficient power management? The 354th's pilots weren't talking. They'd been ordered not to discuss fuel systems with anyone outside their unit. But word spread anyway, through maintenance crews, through intelligence officers, through bomber pilots who'd watched Mustangs from the 354th stay on station, while escorts from other groups turned for home. On November 12th, a team of engineers from Wright Field arrived at Boxted. They'd heard rumors about experimental fuel. They wanted answers, and they wanted to see Kowalski. The lead engineer, a captain named Howard Marsh, was skeptical. He'd spent 4 years studying fuel chemistry at MIT. He'd worked on the development of 100-octane aviation gasoline. The idea that some sergeant had brewed a better fuel in a workshop with hand-mixed chemicals seemed absurd. Kowalski showed him the mixing process, explained the chemical rationale. Marsh ran calculations, checked the proportions, looked at the results from 3 weeks of operational use. 0 engine failures, 0 fuel system problems, extended range documented on 23 separate missions. Marsh's skepticism shifted to amazement. This wasn't supposed to work. The mixture violated established principles about fuel volatility and octane ratings. But it did work. Perfectly, reliably, repeatedly. Subscribe to this channel right now if you want to hear more stories about the people who changed history with backyard innovation. The ones the official records never mentioned. Marsh sent a priority message to Wright Field. Subject: improved fuel mixture for extended range operations. He recommended immediate testing and potential adoption for all 8th Air Force fighter units. The engineers at Wright Field were initially resistant. They had years of expertise in fuel chemistry. They'd developed careful specifications for aviation gasoline. A field modification using hand-mixed additives couldn't possibly meet the standards required for operational use, but the operational results couldn't be ignored. Wright Field sent a formal testing team in December. They brought laboratory equipment, ran detailed analysis on Kowalski's mixture, measured octane ratings, energy density, volatility curves, detonation characteristics. The results confirmed what operational experience had already shown. The mixture maintained proper octane rating, increased energy density by 6.2%, maintained correct volatility at altitude, showed no tendency to pre-detonate under high compression. It was, by every measurable standard, superior to standard 100-octane aviation gasoline for high-altitude operations. The testing team wanted to know how Kowalski had developed this mixture without laboratory equipment or formal analysis. Kowalski's answer was simple. He'd worked with these chemicals for 7 years before the war. He knew how they behaved. He understood the principles. He'd made educated guesses and tested them the only way he could, by putting them in an aircraft and flying. The engineers asked if he'd documented his development process. Kowalski said no. He just mixed batches until one seemed right. That answer horrified the Wright Field team. No documentation, no systematic testing protocols, no peer review. Just trial and error and intuition. It violated every principle of scientific methodology, but it had worked. By January 1944, Wright Field issued Technical Order 2011C20, authorizing the use of toluene-enhanced aviation gasoline for long-range fighter operations. The official mixture ratio was slightly different from Kowalski's original formula. The engineers had refined it based on laboratory testing, but the fundamental concept was identical. Add aromatic compounds to increase energy density, extend combat radius without modifying aircraft. The technical order credited Wright Field's Fuel Research Division for the development. Kowalski's name didn't appear anywhere in the documentation. Production of the enhanced fuel began at refineries in England and the United States. By March 1944, most 8th Air Force fighter units were using the improved mixture. The impact on operations was immediate and dramatic. P-51 Mustangs that previously had a combat radius of 475 miles could now reach 560 miles. P-47 Thunderbolts, which had been limited to 325 miles, could reach 410 miles. The extended range meant American fighters could escort bombers to Berlin, to Munich, to targets deep in eastern Germany that had previously been beyond reach. The Luftwaffe couldn't adapt. Their entire defensive strategy had been built around the assumption that American fighters would run out of fuel at predictable points. They'd positioned their fighter groups accordingly, planned their attack timing based on when escorts would turn back. Now American fighters were staying with the bombers for entire missions. German fighter pilots who attacked bomber formations found themselves fighting Mustangs and Thunderbolts over targets that should have been beyond American fighter range. Luftwaffe loss rates climbed steeply through the spring of 1944. In January, the Luftwaffe lost 248 fighters in combat over Germany. In February, 355. In March, 492. The German fighter force was being ground down by attrition. Part of this was due to improved American tactics, better training, numerical superiority. But a significant factor was the extended range that kept American fighters over Germany for longer periods, giving them more opportunities to engage and destroy German aircraft. German intelligence finally figured out what had changed in April. They recovered wreckage from a P-51 that had been shot down near Augsburg. The crash had ruptured the fuel tanks. German chemists analyzed residue from the tanks, identified the presence of toluene and other aromatics in higher concentrations than standard aviation gasoline. They realized the Americans had modified their fuel to extend range. The Germans tried to develop their own enhanced fuel mixtures, but they faced a critical shortage of toluene. Germany's chemical industry was being systematically destroyed by Allied bombing. They couldn't produce enough toluene for military needs. By June 1944, the air superiority battle over Germany was effectively decided. American fighters ranged across German skies at will. Bomber losses dropped from 10% per mission in late 1943 to less than 2% by mid-1944. The Luftwaffe was still dangerous, still capable of inflicting damage, but it could no longer prevent American bombers from reaching their targets. The extended range provided by enhanced fuel was a major factor in that shift. Historical analysis after the war estimated that the improved fuel mixture contributed to the destruction of approximately 840 additional German aircraft that would have survived if American fighters had been forced to turn back at their original fuel limits. Those 840 aircraft represented nearly 10% of total German fighter production for the first half of 1944. More importantly, the enhanced fuel allowed fighters to protect bomber formations that would otherwise have been vulnerable. Estimates suggest the improved fighter coverage saved between 180 and 230 heavy bombers that would have been shot down on deep penetration missions. Each bomber carried a crew of 10 men. 230 bombers meant 2,300 aircrew lives saved. That number didn't include the additional lives saved when those surviving bombers continued flying missions, destroying targets, degrading Germany's ability to wage war. The compound effects rippled through the entire strategic bombing campaign. Kowalski's fuel mixture hadn't just extended range, it had fundamentally altered the balance of air power over Europe. What happened to Andrew Kowalski tells you everything about how innovation is recognized in military organizations, or rather how it isn't. Kowalski received no medal for developing the enhanced fuel mixture, no official commendation, no mention in after-action reports. The technical order that authorized the fuel credited Wright Field's research division. Kowalski's contribution was classified as a field modification that had been properly validated and improved by qualified engineers. He did receive a promotion. In December 1943, his group commander recommended him for technical sergeant. The promotion went through. Kowalski spent the rest of the war as a fuel system specialist, traveling between fighter groups in England, teaching maintenance crews how to mix and handle the enhanced fuel properly. He became known among ground crews as the man who'd figured out how to make Mustangs fly farther. But his name never reached beyond that informal network. After the war ended, Kowalski returned to Newark. He went back to work at the chemical plant where he'd learned fuel chemistry before enlisting. He worked there for 33 years, eventually becoming plant supervisor. He married in 1947, had 2 daughters, lived a quiet, middle-class life in suburban New Jersey. He rarely talked about the war. When people asked what he'd done in the service, he said he'd worked on aircraft fuel systems. Nothing special. In 1978, a military historian researching the development of long-range fighter operations found references to experimental fuel mixtures tested by the 354th Fighter Group in late 1943. The historian tracked down records from Wright Field, found the original technical order, noticed it had been issued unusually quickly without the normal lengthy development cycle. That suggested the mixture had originated from field experience rather than laboratory research. The historian started interviewing veterans from the 354th. Captain Robert Mitchell, by then a retired colonel living in Arizona, told the historian about Kowalski, about the experimental fuel, about the first mission to Schweinfurt, about how one sergeant had solved a problem that was killing bomber crews. The historian found Kowalski in Newark, asked him about the fuel development. Kowalski confirmed the story, said it wasn't anything remarkable, just applied some chemistry he'd learned before the war. The historian asked if he understood how many lives his innovation had saved. Kowalski said he'd never counted. He just remembered the bomber crews who made it home. The historian published a paper about the enhanced fuel in the Journal of Military History in 1982. The paper documented Kowalski's role, explained the chemistry, analyzed the operational impact. It estimated that the fuel mixture contributed to saving between 2,000 and 2,500 American aircrew lives through improved fighter coverage on deep penetration missions. The paper received modest attention in academic circles. It didn't make national news. Kowalski didn't receive belated recognition from the Air Force or the government. Andrew Kowalski died in 1994 at age 76. He was buried in St. Mary's Cemetery in East Orange, New Jersey. His obituary in the Newark Star-Ledger mentioned his service in World War II as a fuel systems technician with the 8th Air Force. It did not mention that he'd developed a fuel mixture that extended fighter range by 100 miles. Did not mention that he'd helped win the air superiority battle over Germany. Did not mention the 2,500 lives his chemistry had saved. His workshop at Boxted Airfield, where he'd mixed the first batches of enhanced fuel in 55-gallon drums with hand-crank agitators, no longer exists. The airfield was returned to agricultural use after the war. The buildings were torn down. The runways were plowed under. Nothing remains to mark where one of the most significant innovations in air combat was developed. Just empty fields in Essex, where wheat grows, and no one remembers. But the principle Kowalski discovered remains fundamental to aviation fuel chemistry. Modern jet fuel uses similar concepts. Aromatic compounds to increase energy density, carefully balanced additives to optimize performance characteristics. The specific chemistry has evolved, become more sophisticated, been refined through decades of research. But the core insight, that you could modify fuel composition to extend aircraft range without changing the aircraft, that came from a sergeant with a workshop and some chemicals and the willingness to experiment. The enhanced fuel remained in use through the end of World War II. Post-war, as new aircraft designs and jet engines emerged, the specific mixture became obsolete, but the research it prompted led to improved fuel formulations for piston engines, better understanding of hydrocarbon combustion, advances in fuel additives that benefited both military and civilian aviation. The Korean War-era F-86 Sabre used fuel mixtures that incorporated lessons learned from Kowalski's experiments. So did civilian airliners in the 1950s and 1960s. In 2003, the Air Force History and Museums program completed a comprehensive study of technological innovations that affected the air war in Europe. The study identified 43 significant innovations that had measurable impact on operations. Enhanced aviation fuel ranked 7th in terms of operational effect, behind radar, proximity fuses, and several aircraft design improvements, but ahead of most weapon systems and tactical developments. The study noted that the enhanced fuel had originated from field experimentation by maintenance personnel, rather than formal research programs. Today you can find brief mentions of toluene enhanced aviation fuel in technical histories of World War II aviation. The references are usually footnotes, short paragraphs acknowledging that fuel chemistry was modified during the war to improve range. Kowalski's name appears in exactly 3 published books about World War II. All 3 are specialized technical histories with limited circulation. None are bestsellers. The story of how one chemical plant worker changed the air war has been largely forgotten. But 2,500 men came home from the war because fighters running on Kowalski's fuel stayed with their bombers instead of turning back. Those men had children. Those children had children. The descendants of the air crew who survived because American fighters could reach Schweinfurt and Berlin and Munich number in the thousands now. They live ordinary lives. They don't know that their existence traces back to a sergeant who mixed chemicals in a workshop in Essex. That's how wars are actually won. Not by generals or grand strategies or massive industrial production, though all those matter. Wars are won by mechanics who figure out how to make engines run better, by sergeants who know chemistry and aren't afraid to experiment, by people who see a problem that's killing their friends and refuse to accept that the problem can't be solved. Wars are won by Andrew Kowalski standing in a workshop at 0200, mixing chemicals by hand, hoping the proportions are right, knowing that if he's wrong, a pilot will die, but knowing that if he's right, hundreds might live. The Luftwaffe never understood what happened. Their intelligence reports from 1944 noted the increased range of American fighters, documented the presence of fuel additives, tried to replicate the mixture, but they never knew it had been developed by one man in one workshop over 2 weeks in October 1943. They assumed it was the product of extensive research programs, teams of chemists, sophisticated laboratory testing. The idea that a sergeant had just mixed some chemicals and extended fighter range by 100 miles would have seemed absurd to them. Impossible. The kind of thing that didn't happen in modern warfare. But it did happen. It happened because the Army Air Forces, for all its regulations and bureaucracy, sometimes allowed innovation from the bottom up, because Colonel Peck decided to authorize unauthorized fuel experimentation instead of court-martialing the sergeant who'd conducted it, because Captain Mitchell was willing to fly an aircraft fueled with an untested mixture, because the alternative was watching more bombers die, because Andrew Kowalski knew chemistry and cared enough to use that knowledge, even though using it violated regulations and risked lives, including his own. If this story moved you, we need your help sharing it. Drop a comment right now telling us where you're watching from. What country? What city? Are you in Texas or Germany or Japan or somewhere else? This community stretches across the world. You're not just watching. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served in the 8th Air Force or flew bombers or worked on aircraft. Let us know you're here. Let us know these stories matter to you. Andrew Kowalski never claimed to be a hero. He always said he was just a mechanic who remembered some chemistry. When the historian asked him in 1978 if he understood the significance of what he'd done, Kowalski said he'd just been trying to help. Fighters needed more range. He knew how to modify fuel. It seemed like the obvious thing to try. Nothing special, nothing heroic, just doing the job. But 2,500 men came home because he did that job. 2,500 aircrew who would have died when their bombers were shot down after fighter escorts ran out of fuel and had to turn back. Those men lived full lives. They had families. They built careers. They grew old. They died in their beds surrounded by grandchildren instead of burning in B-17s over Germany. All because one sergeant mixed toluene with aviation gasoline and extended fighter range by 100 miles. That's Andrew Kowalski's legacy, not the technical order, not the papers in military history journals, not the recognition he never received. His legacy is 2,500 men who lived and everyone who came after them. His legacy is proving that the most important innovations sometimes come from the most unexpected places, from workshops behind flight lines, from sergeants who know chemistry, from people who refuse to accept that problems can't be solved. His legacy is showing that courage isn't just facing enemy fire. Sometimes courage is mixing chemicals that might explode and putting them in an aircraft and hoping your chemistry is right. Sometimes courage is breaking regulations to save lives. The story of World War II is told through battles and campaigns and famous generals. But the war was won by people like Andrew Kowalski, the ones whose names don't appear in history books, the ones who solved problems quietly, the ones who did their jobs and never expected recognition, the ones who changed everything and then went back to ordinary life as if what they'd done was nothing special. They were the ones who won the war. They deserve to be remembered. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for making sure Andrew Kowalski and the 2,500 lives he saved don't disappear into forgotten history. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications. We're bringing you stories like this every week. Stories about the real people who changed the war. The ones who deserved recognition and never got it until now.